Before Bob Maupin built this chain-link fence, life on his 250-acre ranch was a lot more dangerous. He lives in Boulevard in East San Diego County. His property touches the border with Mexico.
It took me 5 years to build this fence.
And over the years, Bob says he's encountered thousands of illegal immigrants on his property.
There's another group.
In the 1980s and 90s, his property became a hotbed for drug smugglers, illegal aliens, and violent gangs trying to sneak across his ranch to enter the United States. Back then, there was no wall.
You name it. They've been here.
So Bob had to secure the border and his property himself. He built up a good rapport with the Border Patrol and went through the Customs and Border Protection Citizens Academy.
And this is what they look like on infrared at night.
Bob and a group of volunteers would go out and catch illegal immigrants on his property. At night, he wore this.
We would get around the group and we would turn on a flashlight, really, really bright, and then turn it off. Now they can't see. All they can do is hear you.
Then call Border Patrol to come pick them up.
We used to pick up anywhere from 20 to over 100 a night.
But those weren't the only intruders.
There's a Mexican policeman on my property with his gun drawn.
Corrupt Mexican officials scoping out his property was a weekly occurrence in the 80s. Then, in August 1985, Bob had another surprise.
My wife and I were standing out in the patio, and we smelled something that smelled like a doctor's office.
It was ether. Bob immediately called his friend, an undercover narcotics agent. He told him that's an ingredient used to make methamphetamine.
And he says, they must be making it by the boatload down there. If you could smell it all the way from Mexico to your house.
Bob met with a DEA agent, and they mapped out the location of the meth lab. Then he told Bob he would pass the information on to their Mexican counterparts.
The Mexican authorities were supposed to go close it down. They didn't.
Instead, about a week later, Bob received some unwelcome guests while out on his ranch with his teenage daughter.
That is when we were surrounded by the squad of Mexican army and disarmed and marched back up to the house.
Bob led the army through a cattle trail, and his daughter was able to sneak back into the house and call Border Patrol.
The reason they were here was to tell me to keep my nose out of their business. That's what the Border Patrol told me.
Bob didn't do that, but he did make a few adjustments.
So I started wearing a bulletproof vest.
Now Bob's property has a fence along the border. The U.S. government built it in the 1990s during Operation Gatekeeper. But Bob says that only stopped the flow of cars from crossing the border, not the pedestrians.
They were watching the gates, but they weren't watching the fences in between the gates or the ports of entry.
In fact, because a landing mat fence was installed horizontally, the grows provided steps and made it easy to climb over. In late 1999, early 2000, he built his own fence to help slow them down. It's 10 feet tall and 60 feet from the government fence.
Over a mile and a half.
The second layer of fencing also gave Border Patrol more time to apprehend suspects. But it wasn't cheap.
Over $25,000. Repairing the property and building this fence. Do stuff
Repairing
like that.
it from constant damage.
This was cut in my fence by MS-13. See the big M? They cut it open, I fix it.
Bob told NTD he wants the U.S. government to build a wall across the entire border so he can finally have some peace and quiet. And despite the hard work and high cost of securing the border all on his own, Bob says he doesn't plan on stopping.
Oh, good Lord, no.
Even though he'd like to someday.
Why should I capitulate to a bunch of damn criminals?